Good morning. This is Jason Dean calling you again from the dark depths of cinema. How's it going today? Yeah, this is another installment of Film Fanatic. Hope everyone's doing good. Yeah, it is Thursday. We are in in summer mode. This past Saturday was the summer solstice, so it's officially here. So I hope everyone's doing good. I have been really loving so many of these newer movies that I've been watching. I've been buying a ton of movies. I went to Bull Moose a few times the last few weeks. Also went to a big sale at my favorite place, Opera House Video. They do these street sales about. They usually do it maybe twice a year or so. They've done it for almost. It's probably been about a year, and they've had about three or four of these big sales where they basically sell off their extra stock of movies. They have multiple copies of movies, or they just don't have the storage space, so they sell a ton of movies. So between that and some of my trips to Bull Moose, it's been pretty amazing here. Always, there's always tons of movies to watch here at Film Fanatic headquarters. Tons of movies to talk about. And today's show is on a movie that I picked up about a week ago, and I had heard about this movie, and believe I had seen it. In my many trips to Bull Moose Music, I usually go. I mean, I love all of the shops, but each shop is pretty different from one another. But in my travels, I had seen this movie in the on the shelves, throughout over a period of time, and I just never took an interest in buying it. I thought it looked really awesome. And then last week I was in Bangor and I had to I didn't have very much time as far as I wanted to buy some movies, but I didn't have a whole lot of time. So I ended up buying it then, buying this movie. And this movie is completely ridiculous. It's so terrible, but it's so amazing, and it actually has one of the greatest kills that I've seen in recent time. It's kind of shocking, and that is Paganini's Horror. This is a super low budget horror exploitation movie that only the Italians can make, and I have to say it's kind of amazing. It came out in 1988, and I was uh, I was I was kind of blown away by it, and to be totally honest, it was directed by Luigi Cosi, and so this is. And the other thing that's really strange about this film, because he's not even in the movie very much. Donald Pleasance is in this movie, and he's the rest of the cast. This is an Italian film, came out in '88, and so the rest of the cast is all Italian. It's all Italian. The one of the cool things about this is you can watch it in Italian and in its native language with English subtitles. I've talked about this feature or that feature many times in a lot of these shows, of where essentially these movies are they're low down and dirty exploitation movies. But I also think of them, obviously, probably, well, first and foremost is they're foreign movies, and so I have a ton of Italian movies now. I've been buying a shit ton of Italian movies, but I have a huge, when I think about it, a huge percentage of a lot of these movies that I have now that I own into my collection. And the other thing that's frustrating is I've completely run out of space for my movies, so I will have to invest in getting some new shelving pretty soon. But most of the movies I own are essentially foreign movies. Lately, it's been a lot of Italian movies, but I have a ton of Spanish movies. I have a pretty good amount of Asian movies, Japanese, Filipino films. I have some German films. It's just so cool that so many of these movies were coming out. But one of the greatest features about with a lot of these Blu-rays is you can watch the film in its original theatrical cut, but then you can also watch it in its native language. When I first started watching Paganini's horror, I it was the more or less the the English dubbed version. And there's a charm to watch. Obviously, with in the world of exploitation, there's something amazingly cool about watching the movie in its in the dubbed version, because that is how we first saw the film. That's the cut that we got in the United States. Whether people saw it in the theater or in my case, growing up in the time of VHS. So, there was usually 99% of the time it was only the American version, the dubbed version that was available, and and also most of the time it was a copy of a copy. Like, it wasn't even the original pressing of the movie. There was lots of bootlegging going on in the '80s with copies of VHS. A lot of these movies were banned at one point, so independent people would make copies of these and try to make a quick buck off of them. But then, other companies would, a lot of these filmmakers, a lot of these directors kind of got screwed to a degree, because they would get, on one hand, they would get their film distributed to a theater, or say to North America or what have you, but the distributor would basically take over or take control of the film, and there was no such thing as I guess what we would call now copyright infringement. And a lot of these companies would just basically either like cut the movie, they would censor the movie, they would cut out a lot of the graphic scenes, which happened a lot. And they would also, basically recut the movie sometimes, and they would dub. They would have these dubbed versions, and so, and what I find, you know, and again, like, there is a charm, there is it does add an extra, layer of ridiculousness when you watch a lot of these low budget exploitation movies. When you watch like the American version, because it is fun, but I always find that if you watch the typically, if there's an option to watch, say, a director's cut of a film, and then if it's a foreign movie, if you have the option to watch it in its native language, the film is usually a lot more cohesive. The story is a lot more cohesive. It's just a lot more enjoyable, and you get to see more or less what the director of that film really had. As far as his vision, you see it more fully realized. And one of the, I remember one of the movies where that was really the case and it really stood out is one of my favorite slasher movies of all time, Pieces, which was a Spanish movie. I have a really amazing, beautiful copy of that, or edition of that, on Blu-ray, and there's multiple versions of that film on there. And I've seen both versions, and I don't really like the American version at all. It is edited. There are things that are cut, but it's mainly the dubbed of the English translation, or the English version. For me, it does kill the story, but you have the option to watch it in its native language, in Spanish, and it's way more enjoyable. And with Paganini horror, it's same example. Like, there is a menu board, and so it took me a little bit to figure it out, but then I was able to find the right version. There's like three or four versions or three or four options of how you can watch the film. But then I found the right version where you can watch it in its native language, in its original Italian language, with English subtitles, and it's awesome. And again, this movie is so utterly ridiculous. It's so funny that Donald Pleasance is in this movie. This came out. He did this right at quite a few years after Halloween, of course, and a slew of other classic horror movies. But he's like he's not really in the film very much, and it's really funny because his voice is dubbed over, and he's the only American in the film. And I think having Donald Pleasance in this film was definitely a big draw for this film. He was at that time he was kind of at the height of his acting power, and he was obviously in probably the most popular slasher movie of all time, Halloween, of course, and also Halloween 2. Um, so and a slew of other horror movies. Very prolific. He was incredibly prolific. Donald Pleasance was incredibly prolific in the 70s and 80s and even before. So to have for this really low budget Italian movie to have a major American star really obviously ramps up um, the popularity or the attraction for an audience. I'm not sure if this movie was commercially a hit or not. I don't know if it was commercially very successful, but it's amazing. It's so bad. Like there's times in this movie where there's moments in this movie where it's kind of cringeworthy, but it's so awesome though too. It always goes back to like that line, that toting that line that I've always talked about a lot in a lot of these videos of where you know there's that fine line between when something can be so horribly bad or it can be just fantastic. And so many of these movies are able to tote that line. Whereas, you know, when I see an American movie, especially say an American horror movie and a movie that's like that's like recently come out, and there's been a few that I've seen that I've been really disappointed with. There's been some I've really liked, but it it doesn't tote that line. It's usually not they're not very good. It just goes off the tracks. One of the last horror movie I saw in the theater was The First Omen, which is a movie that, in the age that we live in, there's like so many prequels and sequels. And, sequels are it's not a new thing. I mean, they've been around forever. Prequels and what have you, and franchises. But there's definitely more in this time period. But that movie, was very good, very, very well directed, but it just had this second and especially the second act and especially the third act. To me, it became this like tacked on kind of Hollywood, this very stereotypical Hollywood statement about, well, we're going to set this movie up. This movie is just a setup to make more money to make another one. And even though it makes completely no sense, we're going to do it anyway. And before it kind of got to that area, I really liked it. I thought it was really good, very well directed, a lot of suspense. It was unpredictable. But then it just kind of ushered in all of these like tropes, these horror tropes that we just saw over and over again. And it went off the tracks. And again, with going back to this Paganini's horror, it, it totes that line of where it is so ridiculous, but it's I found that this movie, as bad as it is, it's incredibly fun, and it's so bad, it's good. All of those things that would normally ruin, say, a movie, or ruin your experience watching a movie, it it works in this case. It's just really raw. It's like, and it does have some kills in this movie, especially this one kill in this movie that is brutal as all hell, and I was really impressed, and I was like, yes. And this was put out by Severn. Severn, of course, is one of the premier companies out there putting out all of these classic exploitation movies. It's really great. The other thing that's awesome about this movie, it's got a lot of special features, which I started watching last night. There's also a bonus disc with the soundtrack, and the soundtrack is amazing. I just started watching it. It's fantastic. It's got all of this really bad '80s music in it, and then it's got some classical pieces in it, and it's tremendous. The transfer of this film on Blu-ray is gorgeous, and so the audio part of things and the actual visual transfer of the movie, just fantastic. I have a ton of Severn movies, a lot. They are one of the biggest companies out there. They have put out so many wonderful exploitation gems, and this is awesome. Like, I bought this movie. I've had it for a little while, and I was like, one of those things I just didn't get around to watching, and I finally watched it, and I was just like, this movie is the bomb. Super fun. It's just when you think it's funny. One of the things I thought about when I was watching this is like, with all the movies that I watch, and especially in the exploitation world, there's always this level of something of where it's like, the level of just ridiculous, where if a movie moves into such into territory where it's just so utterly ridiculous, or where it's like really unsettling or disturbing, or just terrible, or sleazy, or that maybe the sleazy factor is just through the roof. And it's like, just when you think you've seen, you know, the worst movie, this movie comes along, and but it's great. It's so fantastic. Can't recommend this movie enough. It was worth the wait. So, Paganini's Horror, check it out. So this is Jason Dean from Film Fanatic. And thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.